All right, gentlemen, I'm here with Mike Brcic. We're talking adventure today and what that means for Mike, for me, for the Front Row Dad community, for his community, wayfinders, which we'll dig into what that means in just a moment. But Mike, I will say, it's been a real joy getting to know him over the years, because now I can say it's been years, but more so recently. And, here's what I'll say about Mike. This is the bio from the heart. Like, this is what type of human Mike is. First of all, his reputation amongst all men, whenever you meet somebody that knows Mike, they have such complimentary things to say about him. And the sense that I get, and I'm making this up, the average of all of the comments is that Mike is a quality human. That's what I would say. If somebody say, all right, take all the data that you've received from all the feedback that men have given you, what would you say in as few words as possible? And I would say, Mike is a quality human. People just really respect him, appreciate him, which is why they end up following him around the world. And whenever I open up my Facebook or some social media and I see Mike like summiting some mountain or sitting in some other country doing something amazing, that has an element of trust that people must have in him for him to guide them into adventure, especially around the world in these unknown areas. That to me is a guy that I want to do life with. It's a guy that I want to follow. And also I think that there's a natural draw to people that take you places you've never been. And I think that's a great metaphor for how Mike lives his life, taking you places you've never been and where you can learn things about yourself that you never knew. And so Mike is a family man with a business, not a businessman with a family. He's part of our community. He has his own community. And I asked him to be on the show today so we could talk about adventure, because this is something that's really alive within me right now. Especially we're running our first like Front Row Dad summer adventure with Ali Jafarian. We're taking a big hike in Colorado, and we've never had an official Front Row Dad event that was focused around adventure. This will be our first one. But Mike is a real pro, and I want to get into that today. So Mike, thanks for being here, man. And how are you this morning, by the way?
I'm good, man. I'm always stoked when we get to connect, and I was thinking about this podcast, and there's four elements of what I think makes a true adventure, and I was thinking, I think this podcast interview kind of sort of meets on a lower level all four of those criteria, which we can
What
get
are
into.
they?
Well, I'll give you the quick version: embracing the unknown, risk, a test, and a desired but uncertain outcome.
Mm.
So I don't know what we're going to talk about. That's unknown. It's a risk. I could make a fool of myself. It's a bit of a test because I value our time together, and I value your podcast and your listeners, and so I want to bring a lot of value. And desired but uncertain outcome. I want this podcast to be amazing, but that's uncertain. It could be a bomb. So it
Yeah.
kind of meets all the criteria. Maybe not at the same level as summiting a 20,000-foot volcano in Ecuador, but
But maybe. Mike, let's go back to your childhood for a moment, or as early as you want to take us, and let's start the journey there for today. And the question that I want to ask you is, where did you first really experience adventure? Maybe with the definition that you just gave. What are some of your what is an early memory that you can tie to like maybe the person that you've become today?
yeah. Well, there's two answers to that, and one is my childhood. My parents are Croatian. I grew up in Canada, and every summer they would take me to Croatia, and then sometimes we would travel around Europe, and that kind of felt like a big adventure. Although maybe didn't meet a lot of there wasn't a ton of risk involved in that. But the thing that just kind of kicked off this whole journey was I was 20 years old, decided to take a year off between first and second year university. And with my girlfriend and a friend, went to Southeast Asia and Asia for 6 months. And this was we landed in Bali December 1991. So this is pre-internet. Um, all we had was this, this yellow copy of the Lonely Planet guide. I think it was called the Backpacker's Guide to Southeast Asia or something like that. And other than that, it was just like, it may as well have been that map that said, here be dragons. Because like there,
Mm.
it was every day, every day was unknown. We didn't know what we were going to do. We didn't have any reservations. We didn't book anything in advance. And what was amazing about that was just like really sinking into that experience of just like, I don't know what we're going to do today, and I don't care. It's going to be amazing, or it's going to be crappy, or whatever. Sometimes literally crappy because you get a lot of diarrhea when you're traveling around Southeast Asia in 1991. But that was the bug. That's when I caught the bug. And just like it kicked off a lifetime of adventure. And I can draw a straight line from that to, my eventual career. And I still look fondly back at that trip. And part of me wants to redo that trip, maybe not 6 months, but like visit some of those places. And part of me is like, those places are going to be so different now. And
Mm.
it's not going to be the same adventure, and everybody's going to be Instagramming all over the place and whatever. It's not the same, but I do want to go back to some of those places.
What was one of your favorite memories from that trip? Like a specific story or moment?
Oh, Nepal was such a highlight. Like
Mm.
I love mountains, and we ended up hiking up. You have the Annapurna mountain range in western Nepal. So you have the kind of main regions are the Everest region and the Annapurna region. That's where the biggest mountains are. So we went to the Annapurna region, and we hiked up to Annapurna Base Camp, which is basically like a series of, like these buildings, and you can sleep there and eat there and that kind of stuff. We ended up going up to Annapurna Base Camp, and our very first night there, it just got hammered with snow. And we woke up and we couldn't even open the door out of our cabin because it was completely snowed in, and we had to wait for people to dig us out. And then there was just too much too much snow, too much avalanche danger to go down. So we ended up having to spend 3 days there, and they were running out of food, and more importantly, running out of beer. And things were starting to get a little desperate. But you're in this like, oh, hey, buddy.
Dude, hold on. We have a surprise guest. I want to announce him. This is for everybody who is either watching or listening now. Tiger just entered the conversation.
Hello.
And this is actually perfect because
Hey,
Mike,
Tiger.
if you don't mind, let me interrupt this because the timing is divine. Tiger, do you know he was in Nepal
No
with
way.
his school? We were just talking about hiking and that being one of Mike's adventures and how much he appreciated Nepal.
Yeah.
Tiger was part of a program put together by some front row dads where his small class of 9 people, these are all front row dad families basically who put their kids together in this like pod, this little jam band as a kid jam band,
Amazing.
and they did a 3-week adventure, and they hiked in the Himalayas and the whole deal. Yeah.
Wild. That
And
is divine timing.
Mike takes people all around the world on great adventures.
That's awesome.
Isn't that cool?
Yeah.
Can I ask you to share real quick?
Sure.
What was a highlight moment for you in Nepal?
Bungee jumping. That's the biggest thing for sure. Yeah, we went out to this resort way out, like deep into the forest, and we bungee jumped. It's like the 10th highest place in the world. It's pretty cool.
Were
That's
you
probably
nervous?
pretty high.
Yeah, it's pretty scary. And then right after we went whitewater rafting, which, good relaxer.
Amazing. Amazing.
So good.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thanks for popping in,
Yeah.
buddy.
Sure.
All right. Well, I'll be done in
Hey,
like
Tiger.
45 minutes. Sorry, Mike. If you remember where you left off, please continue.
Yeah, I was at Annapurna Base Camp running out of food and beer. And it was, I mean, we weren't truly in danger, but if it had gone longer, it would have started to get a little dicey. But you're surrounded by like these 8,000 meter peaks, and it's just stunning. And and just being snowed in there kind of adds to that sense of adventure, right? Like the unknown, the risk, the uncertain outcome, all that kind of stuff. And it's just like Nepal's got such a special vibe, right? Because you have the biggest mountains on earth, but then you have this these beautiful cultures, with this deep reverence for the mountains as well. So I haven't been back to Nepal since then. So I'll probably be back there in the next 2 or 3 years for sure.
Mike, fast forwarding to a recent event, am I making this up? You were on a mountain recently when somebody needed to be rescued. Is that correct? Or
Well,
was I looking at an older post? Was that an old story or was that recent?
if by somebody you mean me, then then it is accurate.
Tell me about that, man. Tell me about getting
Yeah.
rescued.
Oh, so this is just a month ago in Ecuador, and running a Wayfinders adventure. And a little bit of context. So I keep the itineraries for my adventures completely hidden. So people, they show up, they don't know what they're going to be doing any given day. I give them a packing list, and I make sure they're prepared every day and they're wearing what they need to wear, but the rest of it is a surprise. Now, this particular adventure, the pinnacle of this adventure was climbing Mount Cotopaxi, which is just under 19,400 feet. It's a big mountain. So
That's a big
that
hike.
part I couldn't leave out. That's a key detail you can't really leave out. So that was the goal. Now, 4 days before we were due to head up there, I just got completely walloped by a virus, and it just wiped me out. Like I spent 2.5 days lying in bed, barely even able to get up the stairs at our hacienda. And my co-facilitator, he ended up. It also coincided with when we were taking the group out in the wilderness, and they did like a 24-hour solo sort of vision quest kind of journey type thing. And then they came back, and I recovered enough that I went with the group up to the mountain. And so basically, we left the hacienda in the morning, drove about halfway up Mount Cotopaxi, and then hiked an hour to get to the refugio, which is this mountain hut. We had lunch. We had like a chill afternoon, and my intention was I'm going to go there and sense into it, see whether I'm ready for this or not, because my body's still recovering. And so we hung out for the afternoon, and then 7 o'clock was lights out, 7 p.m. And try to get everybody to sleep a couple hours, and then 10:30 wake up time, and then put on all our gear. 11:30 p.m. heading out the door. Now the reason you climb this particular mountain slash volcano at night is because during the day the sun's beating down on it. There's lots of crevasses, whatever. It gets pretty dicey to be on there during the daytime. So I didn't get any sleep, but 10:30 bell rings. I'm like, I'm doing it. I'm going up this mountain. I feel ready enough. And I'd spent 3-4 months training for this, like you wouldn't believe.
Oh,
And 11:30, we get the headlamps on, we get all our gear up, we start heading up. And at that altitude, we're leaving at 16. The refugio was 16,000 feet, so you're already pretty high. And we start hiking up, and you're going so slow. Like if you go, you're basically going at a crawl, and if you go any faster than that, your heart rate is just racing. So you got to go super slow. So it takes us about 6.5 hours to get within 300 feet of the summit. And I just completely hit the wall, just like nothing left, everything, all the energy drains from my body. But I'm so bloody close to this mountain. It's like I can see it right there. There's the summit. And I've spent 4 months training for it. And so it was just everything I had, every bit of mental strength, resilience, whatever, to get up there. And I get up to the top of the mountain, and I ran into my friend, the guy I'd been training with. And later he said I was like kind of delirious and not making any sense. I was, certainly had altitude sickness. And and in my head, it was just like, get to the top, get down, no problem. Well, as I discovered, the top is the halfway point, really. It's not that much easier going down. And anyway, long story short, I had nothing left. And my guide and my co-facilitator, I was roped in to them. It was basically all they could do over the next 4 hours to get me down that mountain. Every 10 minutes, I would just lie down on the snow, and I would just say, just let me nap. Just let me take a like half-hour nap. That's all I need. And they'd say, like, no, you can't take a nap at 19,000 feet. It doesn't. And at one point I said, I'll give you $50,000. Call a helicopter. I can't do this. And unfortunately, there's no way to get a helicopter up there. So I had to get down. And and you know, my legs are shaky. I'm wobbling it was rough. And thankfully they didn't have to like rappel me down the mountain. Somehow I still don't know how I managed to get down because I was so completely spent in a way that I'd never been before, but made it up and made it down. And
Wow.
probably, you know, one of the things that I took away from that was two things that I took away from that was discovering this incredible well of resilience and determination to push through that. And two, sometimes we need discernment. You know, we need to say, hey, enough is enough. And really, realistically, I should have turned around when I first hit the wall, but I just kind of pushed through and I endangered my own safety. I endangered the safety of the people who were with me. And but the funny thing is the ego wants to latch onto the former and forget about the latter. And so I try to keep reminding myself because that lesson, that second lesson will fade from memory if I let it.
Would you say that was the most dicey or dangerous position for your personal safety or health that you've been in on any of these adventures?
I would say it's tied with an experience I had in Greenland, only because that experience in Greenland, I was completely alone. And I
Mm.
wasn't in as precarious a situation in Greenland, but I was by myself. Ecuador was harder and dicier, but I had very qualified people with me.
What happened in Greenland?
I was doing a winter, I was testing out a fat biking trip along this route called the Arctic Circle Trail. And basically, I told my guide and the photographer and the journalist I was with to go ahead to the cabin because I thought the cabin was just around the corner of this lake. And I convinced them that I had plenty of gas left in the tank, which I did at the time. But then what I thought was the end of the lake and where the cabin was actually just a narrow little channel. And the cabin was like 5 miles down this lake. And again, same thing. I hit the wall, couldn't move. My legs seized up. I laid down on the ice. We were on a frozen lake. And it's, you know, it's cold. It's super cold at that time of year in Greenland. And I thought, well, this is pretty dicey. I've just sent all my help away, and I'll probably go hypothermic in 10 minutes here, and I can't move. And I actually started recording videos to my family just to say goodbye, because I thought, you know, this is this is a very precarious situation. Same kind of thing. After about 5 minutes on the ice, I just got myself up and just similar to what, you know, with Ecuador, it's just focus on one pedal stroke at a time and don't think beyond that. And yeah, made it to the cabin about an hour later.
Wow. Um, is there is there a part of you is there a part of you that feels like the hunger for adventure grows as you get older? Does it how does it shift? Like over the years as you look at adventure, your definition of it, your pursuit of it, how is it evolving for you? Is it a little bit less than before because you're just older and wiser? Is it maybe more and just, you know, a smarter approach? Like how has that changed?
Yeah. Well, I'll take that as a two-part question. There's the quantitative answer and the qualitative. And the quantitative is yes, it's that hunger is increasing. Um, and the qualitative answer to that, how has that changed, is I'm more intentional
Mm,
about how I approach adventure, about why I approach it, you know, why I take on these adventures. And really it's about positioning it in a context of meaning. So it's not just, you know, adventure for adventure's sake, go do something cool or fun that, you know, looks good on Instagram, but that it has personal meaning to me. And so to give you an example, you know, I first encountered Mount Aconcagua, which is in Chile, about 15 years ago. And the first time I saw that mountain, I thought, oh my God, I have to climb that mountain. And Mount Aconcagua is the highest mountain outside of the Himalayas. It's the highest mountain in the Americas. It's just under 24,000 feet. It is a big endeavor. It typically takes about 2 weeks to climb it. I got back from Cotopaxi, and as difficult and arduous as that was, um, I came back and I knew that I had to climb Mount Aconcagua. So I've committed myself in 2026 um, to climbing that mountain. And a couple of the guys in my band, I think, are going to join me.
Whoa.
as well. And the context behind that is I think there's a valuable lesson in terms of ego. And I didn't do a very good job of that on Cotopaxi because my ego kind of took over. Like I have to stand on that summit. Um, but I like to think I've taken some lessons from that. One of the lessons I really took from Cotopaxi was about the process. And what was more important to me than standing on the summit was committing to the process. And the process was physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually preparing myself to stand on that peak, or it's not even to stand on the peak, just to attempt that climb, and and that's essentially a 2 day climb. Aconcagua is a 2 week endeavor. You're sleeping in tents the whole time. You're at even higher altitudes. There's way more risk involved, and so what's important about that to me is the process that I have to commit to get ready for that, which
Yeah.
just makes me makes me a makes me a fitter person for sure, makes me more mentally, emotionally, spiritually resilient. In South America, in Ecuador, the mountains are called apus. They're spirits. They're gods. And so, when part of our preparation for Cotopaxi is we did a Pachamama ceremony, which is the hacienda we were staying at. Jorge, who's the owner, has built this what's called a temescal, which are popular in Mexico. It's basically a South American version of a sweat lodge. And we did a ceremony, and we did an offering to the mountain, and to treat it with reverence. This is a being in their cosmology. This is a being, and it's a being that can crush you. And if you come at it with the wrong spirit, or just too much hubris, or whatever that may be. And so for me, Aconcagua was not about getting on top of that summit or not. It's about that process of preparation. It's about the people that I'm going to spend that time with, who, so far the people that have committed are some of the dear, closest friends I know, people that I hold very dearly in regard, and to be able to share that experience with them, not just the climb, but the preparation. Uh, that's one of the, most amazing elements of a true adventure is, and this, right, is the bond that you develop with the people that you share that adventure with, right? And so we think about Frodo and his companions on that journey, the bonds that they have, those bonds are cemented for life. Right?
What are some of the places that you've been, if you just kind of listed off where you've traveled, where you've taken your adventures with wayfinders, or even on your own, but like just looking for like 5 to 7 samples of places that you've adventured?
Sure, I'll give you my 5 favorite.
Okay.
That work? Um, Mongolia, Western Mongolia. I took a group there last October. Spectacular, just like such a vast, huge part of the world, just like vast, wide open spaces, and just nobody there. It's populated by a few hundred nomads. Um, and so there's no permanent structures in this vast, vast region, and spectacular. And it's just one of the most beautiful, quietest places I've been to. Western Uganda, Bwindi Impenetrable Forest that's where about half of the world's mountain gorillas live. And so you've got this incredible jungle full of wildlife, including these gorillas. Then you've got these, you know, 15,000-foot volcanoes all over the place. You've got just this vibrant culture, and people who are just singing and dancing all the time. I love Western Uganda. Patagonia, the
Mm.
Argentinian side of Patagonia. I ran an event there in 2018, and it's just untouched, beautiful, beautiful wilderness. Um, and the culture there is amazing as well. You've got like this kind of more traditional culture, the gauchos and stuff like that, and then you got this culture of like just crazy people who like kayaking, mountain biking, whatever. They just do crazy shit. Um, I want to Greenland. I mentioned Greenland. Um, the the event I ran, we ran it out of it was this lodge with 15 cabins in this tiny village of 48 people, and I went there a year before and just scouted it by myself and spent 5 days in this village all by myself. And it was just like a fascinating glimpse into a totally different way of life and people who live in one of the most extreme places on earth. This is, if you were looking at all the places on the planet where humans could and should live, this would be like dead last on the list. Like It's freezing cold like 10 months of the year. And it's like, what
Yeah.
are you doing there? And people there are so resilient, but they also love it. Like, some of the people I met, they love it when it's January and it's dark 24/7 and it's -40 and they're going out hunting muskox in the dark and stuff like that. They love that. And so Greenland and oh man, Ecuador was just, specifically Mount Cotopaxi, even though it completely kicked my ass,
Yeah.
was just such a special thing, because there's just something about those high alpine environments where you've got those elements of risk, but you've also got like, it was such a beautiful climb, and I enjoyed it on the way up. On the way down, I was just too spent to really enjoy it. But that alpine environment, particularly when you're in the dark and you're just getting little glimpses of it here and there, and these frozen waterfalls and crevasses and stuff like that. So that's just a little snippet.
How have you seen people change, transform through these experiences? Like what is there's got to be something that, I mean, I know there's an element of what you're getting for you personally. There's likely, I'm just making a strong assumption here, but it's like there's likely you're getting something also from this gift you're giving from watching other people transform and change. I think I know enough about your heart to know your desire to want to support other people. Like even at Front Row Dad Live, when you made that generous gift to help, a few others attend this event, I know there's a part of you that wants you want to see other people transform and change too. So what is that? What are you hoping they get? What have you seen?
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for the question. I mean, that's ultimately the goal behind it. The adventure and the travel is simply the delivery mechanism, right?
Yeah.
And the goal is transformation. And there's two parts to it that are important to me. One, one is connection. And I guess the second could fall under the first, but connection, what happens at these events by nature of the shared adventure and the shared challenge, people connect very deeply, right? And we talked a little bit about that sense of camaraderie and whatnot. And when I put people through what I'm putting them through, they tend to connect deeply. And thinking, particularly of these two women who are with me in Ecuador, and both of them trained really hard for this mountain summit. Both of whom felt they couldn't do it, but I just had a sense that they would do it because I could see their resilience and determination. We got up to the top and then started coming down, and probably about half hour after we started coming down, we encountered them going on the way up. And I'm thinking in my head, like I'm so exhausted at this point, I can barely move. They still got an hour of climbing to get to the summit, and they need to get there before 8 a.m., which is the turnaround time. And I'm thinking, there's no way they're going to make it. Turns out they did make it. And they just gave everything they had and pushed through and supported each other. And they're roped in the entire time, the two of them to each other and to their guide, and going through. And I know that they're super tight now. I saw them just last week, and it's beautiful to see that. And I know, maybe I don't know, but I suspect that is going to be a lifetime connection that those two women have. And so connection is a big part of it, but it's not just connection to others, it's connection to self, it's connection to the natural world. I talk about this on my blog. It's connection to a sense of calling in this life. It's connection to a sense of mystery. And then the second part of it is this piece around authenticity, around finding out what is our life to live rather than, what other people have told us what our life is to live. So I take people through this facilitated journey. So we do, in addition to the adventures and activities that we do, we have a lot of facilitated exercises that we do as a group. We do it in small groups, we do it in pairs. I have a wonderful co-facilitator, and we're just trying to take people through a process of like really doing some self-reflection and trying to uncover who they are at their core, and and examining that gap between who they feel they are at their core and the life that they're living, and how they can close that gap. And sometimes that job is just to like scratch that itch and make it a little bit more painful, because we can tolerate, whether it's a job or a relationship or whatever, we can tolerate that it doesn't feel aligned, but it's not awful, and we've lived with it for 15 years. And life's too short to just like compromise on key aspects of our lives. And so sometimes our job is just to like make them aware of the cost of living in that misalignment, and make it a little bit more painful, because that's when they change, right? And so um, taking people to these places just tends to be a great delivery mechanism for creating that transformation.
Do you, I'm wondering if you, how often you get this question, because it's not in line with like the adventure and the joy and the transformation. It actually has to do with the after effect of an adventure, where I'd imagine that the positive expectancy is like, I go have this adventure, I come home and I feel so proud of myself, right? I have this adventure, I have these stories, I have these connections. Like that to me feels like the obvious win after an event like that. But then I remember hearing and feeling myself, there are times when I've gone off and I've done an incredible adventure, but there's actually like a lull afterwards. There's a lackluster, like, oh shit, back to my normal grind. You know, a moment ago I was standing on a mountain, I had great purpose, and now I don't have that next thing. I have this lull afterwards. I remember meeting a guy who was like a former Navy SEAL, talking about how a lot of the guys, when they get out of the SEAL team, experience a form of depression because one moment they're fast roping out of a helicopter, you know, they've got a mission, they've got brothers, they've got a team, they've got a purpose every day. And then when they retire or when they step away from that, none of that exists. They're like,
Yeah.
you know, and do you experience that? And how might you in your community talk about or approach what could, and I'm projecting, you haven't said it, but I'm just guessing that that could exist after these epic experiences.
Yeah, well, you're bang on about that. Especially, especially if you're coming from a place like Mongolia or whatever, you're crossing 12 time zones, and then you come home and you got to go right back into the thick of life with, 12 hours of jet lag.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we talk about that a lot towards the end of our adventures. This process of integration, this process of
Yeah.
landing and coming home. And part of that, obviously, like when people come on my adventures, they're living in this peak state for, 8, 9, 10 days. They're surrounded by amazing people, inspiring people. They have these deep connections. They're doing this cool shit every day. They're usually, offline, so they're not like they're living in the present moment, stuff like that. And then they got to come home and back to their lives. And that can be quite jarring. So we do spend a lot of time talking about that. There's an exercise we do at the end of our adventure, and it's called 5 pages. And they people carry their journal around with them most of the time, because we're always like, we've always got some exercise, whether it's, whether we're in our meeting area or on the side of the trail or whatever. So these are 5 pages that go in their journal. Two of those pages are, one of them is called the never forget page, and the other is the promises page. And so the never forget page is just like writing a list of like, don't forget, everything that you've learned about yourself, about the world, about whatever that is. um, Write that down and put that somewhere prominent when you come home. And I ask them to also to primarily focus on never forget who you were when you showed up here at your best, and what did that look like. And for some people, that's like, I stepped way out of my comfort zone, and I have this deep fear of being seen, and I just showed up as my authentic, vulnerable self, and it felt really good, and people accepted me, right? And so I want people to come home and remember that when I show up as my vulnerable self, people actually connect with me more. So maybe it's time to stop retreating into my shell, right? And so that's an example of like a never forget. Or it might be some other aspect of how they showed up. And then the promise is that's just like 1 to 3 commitments that kind of on the bigger scale, that they make to themselves, and usually related to some moment of clarity. And one of the things we do in our adventures, and I alluded to it, was we do these like, this I just find, and I know you know this, I just find there's so much value from spending time alone in wilderness, like true wilderness. And it helps to be able to take people to like the deepest parts of the Sahara or the Amazon jungle or Greenland or whatever, to have that level of wilderness. But you don't need to go that far. Just like go to, drive out of the city and go find a bit of wilderness and sit there for a couple hours. And so people get these moments of clarity, and I want to make sure that they don't, they're not like a rubber band expanding and then they just snap back when they get home, that they keep this with them. And then the other thing, there's these different groupings that we put people in over the course of the event. One of them is called a moai, which comes from the island of Okinawa, and it's basically like a support group. So it's typically 4 people, and there's at various times we're putting them in their moais because you can't connect with 25 other people, but you can connect with 3 other people really deeply. And so I encourage them to stay in touch with their moai, to share what's going on for them when they come home. To also in our main, we use Signal for our messaging, so just pop in the Signal group and like what's coming up for you, what's going on. So it's hard. It's hard, coming home. And also I really encourage people to have a couple of buffer days after the event, whether it's, in Ecuador or whatever, or whether you come home. I mean, that's pretty challenging, right? If you've got like a family and you've got kids and you're away for 10 days and then you tell your partner, well, can I come home and take a couple more days? So I tell people like just add it on to the end of your like
For sure.
this time around I added a 3-day cruise in the Galapagos Islands, and most of the group came with me, and that was just like chilling out on a yacht, swimming with sea lions or whatever, but also time to just like journal and reflect on what happened, that kind of stuff. It's important. Like any true adventure, you need some. It's kind of not different from like a psychedelic experience. You have these transformations, but it's how you integrate them into your life that's the important thing, right? And so you got to make space for that integration.
So important, man. I have to put several exclamation points on that exact concept because and I shared that we have our VIP retreat coming up in the Keys in a couple of weeks, and I recorded a video to explain exactly what you just shared. Buffer time on the front end too, like transition time to get into an event. I used to fly in, I cut it as close as I could, so it's like I could then wear the badge of like I was home for every minute I could be.
Yeah.
And that's a wonderful badge. Like the intention behind that is awesome. Like you want to be a great dad, you want to get as much time with your kids. Like I honor that badge that you want to wear. I wanted to wear. And I realized that I sacrifice, if I'm really going to go do the event and I'm going to take the time away, why not tack on an additional 20%, which makes it 100, like for the buffer to make the event 100% more effective. So that my time away from my family is really valuable because I actually have a chance to prep for the dive that I'm about to do. Then I have a chance to process and integrate the information before I get back to my family, and I show up a better human to my family.
Yeah.
Sometimes I would catch that red eye, get home, and then what I bring is a guy a couple hours or a couple days earlier, but he's got bloodshot eyes and nothing to give to his family because I rushed home.
Yeah.
Versus like the guy who's like, hey, thanks for showing up energized, and like, please go away on these adventures again, because who you come back as is awesome. I love that.
Well, and if I could add on to that, one of the things, that I think would be useful to you, anybody hosting events, but also anybody going on their own personal adventure, I make sure that every one of my adventures, my events, it starts with a ceremony. There's an opening ceremony and there's a closing ceremony. And the purpose of those ceremonies is to say, the welcome ceremony is to say, we are leaving the old world behind. We are stepping into a new place, and we are stepping into this place together. And we also partner that with this ritual of creating a sacred space. So one of the things I do is I ask everybody to bring a small but significant object, something that has meaning for them. And then we create a little, we have our meeting space and we have a little altar. And I ask people, just share a story about that object, why it's meaningful to you, and I want you to put it on our altar. And then we go around the room and people share these, deeply vulnerable stories, sometimes tearful stories. This bracelet was given to me by my mother who's now passed, or my child, or whatever. And it creates this energetic shift in this sacred space that we create together. And then on the closing ceremony, same thing is say, okay, we are closing this, we're leaving this space behind, and we are transitioning back into a new world, the old world that we left behind, but we're coming into that as different people, as new people, right? And so if you look at that, and that's something, you can bring, like, if you are like, I'm thinking of Chris, who went on the Camino. And I don't know, how long did he spend on the Camino? Like a month, 2 months, something like that.
month and a half ish.
And he's a very intentional guy, and he may have already done something like this. But that is not just a walk. It's a spiritual journey, right? And to be able to come into that place And just symbolically, our psyches respond very powerfully to symbols. And to be able to have just, it can be a small ceremony, but just to say like, hey, I'm entering this new space with intention. I'm leaving behind that old world and I'm stepping into this new world. And then do the same thing on the back. And it's really powerful.
Yeah, so much so. Who do you look to in the world that is like a great adventurer, somebody who's a great facilitator? All of what you're describing, all of what you have become in your life, this incredibly intentional, adventurous, community building man, that you are now known for and you have a track record for. Who do you look at and say, man, that was a guy, or that's a woman, or that's a person in my life that really inspired me in this space? Who are your idols? Maybe they're, fictional characters or whatever, but like, yeah, who paved the way for you?
Yeah. Well, I'm going to give you two answers, one of which you'll like a lot. The first answer, I would say, one of my earliest mentors in this sort of space that I'm operating is a fellow by the name of Wade Davis, and he's a fellow Canadian. I think he calls himself an ethnobotanist, which means he studies the interaction between the human world and the plant world. He is a National Geographic Explorer in residence. He's written, I don't know, 10 books. I call him Canada's Indiana Jones, and he has done just some really crazy badass shit. Like he lived in the deepest reaches of the Amazon in the 80s, with tribes that had never had human contact. And he was the first outsider ever to be invited into a voodoo ceremony in Haiti and stuff like that. And he's done just some crazy shit, but with like beautiful intention of like really wanting to, with reverence for these cultures. And he wrote a book called The Wayfinders. And and the subtitle of that book is Why Ancient Wisdom Matters in the Modern World. And the wayfinders that he points to were like the early Polynesian navigators who helped that culture populate these islands that were like, separated by 500 miles. Without navigation, it would be a suicide mission to try and find these islands. But he talks about like the ancient wisdom that they used to be able to navigate. Anyway, I reached out to him. My company was previously, when I started, it was called Mastermind Adventures because it was kind of part mastermind. It was an adventure. I was just like, okay, fine, good enough. And then a couple of years later, I was like, mastermind, it's kind of overused term and, not very poetic. And I happened to be reading The Wayfinders again. I thought, oh, what a perfect metaphor for what I'm trying to do is like help people with their wayfinding. So I reached out to Wade and I said, hey, what do you think? Are you okay with this? And he gave me his blessing. And we've stayed in touch. He's an amazing human being. So he's the first answer, just in terms of that sense of adventure, but bringing the right spirit. He's not just going to the Amazon just for shits and giggles. He's going there because he believes there's something really valuable to share with the world from those cultures. And the second one is you. And I just love the intentionality, the ethos, the heart that you bring to this community. And I've shared this with you a few times. It's beautiful to watch and beautiful to see the journey that you've gone on personally to be able to bring your best to this community. And so I take a ton of inspiration from that on an emotional and a heart level, but also like on a tactical level, some of the ways that you built this community, I take ideas from that and bring it to my own community. So those are my two biggest inspirations in terms of how I'm building what I'm building. So I want to say thank you to you for what you're doing in the world.
Thanks, man. I appreciate that. I don't know if you can tell by the video, but I've got some tears in my eyes and I feel very, I feel touched by that and I appreciate that. And largely, I think that it feels, I may actually reflecting on my own like reaction to your comment, like why did that generate tears? And I think that part of it is like I have tremendous reverence and respect for you and what you've done. And I'm very attracted to people that pursue adventure. I'm very attracted to people that are willing to take risks. And partially because like the little boy inside of me is so scared as shit to go do some of that stuff. Like genuinely, I recognize the very conservative, careful part of me. Even like yesterday in the kitchen, there's this this knife in the drawer. And I said to Tatiana, I go, are you ever worried that somebody's gonna like reach into this drawer and cut their hand? And she's like, no, I think people have common sense. They know there's a knife there. They're not gonna. I'm like, but what if they're not looking? And like I recognize like that version of John exists. And then I also have this other version of John that wants to push beyond that and risk the adventure, the one that has jumped out of an airplane before, that recognizes like I feel alive when I carefully put my life on the line. Like I'm not trying to die, but I think that the closer I get to like, there is the real risk that something could happen, that addressing my mortality, looking at mortality makes me feel like this moment matters more. It's a moment amplifier for me. And I share all that because I'm like, why is it that I love what Mike's doing so much? And I'm like, oh, because he can take me places that I would maybe not go on my own, because he has the courage to lead people into those spaces. So thank you, man. I appreciate your comment. And I think that I don't predict the future well. I really don't. But I have this sense that you and I have collaborative work to do on some level. Like this is just the beginning of a great decade in some way, shape, or form for us,
Yeah.
whatever that looks
Yeah.
like. And we're already doing it. I mean, we're in the midst of it now by having this conversation, of course, but something tells me there's like a great adventure ahead. And that is really cool to think about.
Yeah. Question is, who's Frodo and who's Bilbo?
Dude,
We're
Ocean
both
just
Frodo.
watched The Hobbit for the first time. It was very
Oh
cool.
man, so good.
He
So
just watched The Hobbit for the first time. Hey, on that note of like film and story and in what are you reading right now? What have you read recently? Or think in terms of like film and book and story. Has there anything recently caught your attention, or are you in the middle of?
Oh man. I mean, I always find that question so hard to answer because I fill my head with so much stuff, like so many books and so many movies. And um, I just I rewatched The Princess Bride with my kids.
Dude, that's so funny. I just talked to my kids about that. We saw a preview for it. That's so
Yeah,
great.
and there's just it's it's kind of hard to pinpoint what is so magical about that movie,
Yeah.
but it's like everybody who's seen that movie like resonates with it, and there's just like there's that sense of adventure, of course, and then they're like an amazing cast, and but I think it's like this sense of playfulness
Yeah, that's right.
and about it, and it's one of those movies I could just watch every couple of years and just like love it to death every single time and share that with my kids. And that's a beautiful thing. And I think a lot of these movies that resonate deeply with people, whether it's The Hobbit or whether it's Star Wars or whatever, right? They're built on the hero's journey, on Joseph Campbell's hero's journey. And I think there's so much value in appreciating that journey and understanding the context of that journey and being able to see one's life in the context, whether it's one's life in general or whether it's like little microcosms of that, and to be able to understand the elements of that hero's journey and be able to understand where in that journey you are and how you can get value from that. And one of the biggest parts of the hero's journey is the test, right? We leave our familiar world and we go out into the unknown and we face a test. And if we complete that test successfully, we come back differently. We come back wiser. We come back stronger. And we bring that. And the final part of the hero's journey isn't that we, come back wiser and stronger and we hoard it. We hoard it all to ourselves. It's that we bring that back to our community, to the people that we're with, right? And so that's the true value of adventure, is being able to bring back those gifts and share them with others. And you touched on this idea of like, coming back a better husband, a better father, and sharing those gifts with the people around you. And so now that my kids are 13, and 15, and they can a little more readily appreciate the themes and not just the plot of these movies, whether it's Star Wars, The Hobbit, or whatever. And hopefully that permeates into them, and in this understanding that if we want to do great things in life, and if we want to you know, have an impact on this world and make the world better around us, then we have to leave the unknown, and we have to take these tests. And so I think, like, you know, I always resonate with books and art and movies and whatever that follows that journey. And, you know, ultimately most movies follow that, but some are very explicit about it, and powerful.
Let's let's talk about kids and parenting for the final piece of the conversation here. And again, I'm looking at the clock. If we run out of time and you got to split, just cut me off, okay?
I'm good. I'm good.
But talk to me about the intersection between these adventures and our kids, and you can take that anywhere you want, Mike. It could be like, how have these adventures informed your parenting in some way? It could be, how have you taken your kids on adventures? You know, how have you then created these shared experiences with them? You know, and how might parents approach that? But I want to, of course, bring in the kids. I think, and while you think about where you want to take that, for context, I want to say this also. You know, I've focused Front Row Dads on men connecting to other men. And that's my very narrow focus, with the specific intention that if they can have vulnerable conversations, if they can focus on expansion and healing and this co-creative brotherhood, that they will then bring that back to their families and be better fathers, better husbands, better community members because of this group they have, this tribe they have. And for years, people have said, hey, John, why don't you create a family event? Why don't you have father-son adventures or father-daughter adventures? Or like, can we do one where we bring the kids? I mostly haven't done that because of bandwidth. It's just like, I only have so many hours in the day. I've learned over time that if I try to be all things to all people, I usually fail. So if I can focus in on my very specific target, then I can know that's the lead domino that I think does impact everything else. And I hope men do get together with their kids and other dads and take adventures. And I hope all that exists. I hope they get family gatherings together at a local level. But I just haven't put a lot of energy into that. But I do think it's very important for me to try to understand how to build the bridges, how to take the work that we're doing as men and apply it to our kids. Because I also don't want to go hide from our kids. I don't want this to be just about dudes hanging out with dudes and then ignoring the family. That's not the goal. The goal is to amplify everything with the family. So I guess the question is, like, what can we learn, or what can we talk about, or what can we share about your experience with your kids, or how men can impact their kids through this?
Yeah, great question. Maybe I can set this up. I was journaling this morning, but this idea of adventure. And the two things I thought about were, what are the ingredients that make up, you know, true adventure? And what are the qualities that you need to bring to an adventure? So I want to just quickly set this up with that, because I think it's germane to this topic around kids. So I want to distinguish between adventure. It's like, oh, we're going to the mall, we're going on an adventure, and like capital A adventure, we're going on an adventure. And that doesn't necessarily need to be like going to Mongolia. It could be an inner adventure, right?
Mm-hmm.
But this is what my personal take is on what makes a true adventure. So I touched on this at the beginning, the unknown. So we don't know what's going to happen. If we know what's going to happen, it's not an adventure. So there's an element of, you know, uncertainty. Risk is obviously part of that unknown. If there's no risk, it's not really an adventure. A test, some sort of physical, emotional, spiritual, or whatever, there's some element of test. And then a desired but uncertain outcome. And so this ties back into the unknown. But, you know, if I think back to Ecuador, the desired outcome was standing on top of Cotopaxi. No idea if I'm going to make it up there or not. But also part of that, you know, that desired outcome is to be able to have an actual reason, some meaning behind it. So it's not just having some fun or whatever. And maybe, you know, like having fun, if that's a true deep intention, that is the meaning behind it. But those are some of the elements that I think make up a true adventure. And then I spent some time thinking about, what are the qualities that you can bring to really get value out of adventure. So curiosity and open-mindedness is one of them, being open to whatever happens, which goes along with flexibility and acceptance. It's just like, hey, I've got a plan, but, you know, it may not happen. Determination and discernment. So you got to be determined to push through the obstacles that are inevitably going to come up, but you also have to have that process of discernment and say, okay, enough is enough, right? Courage is obviously an important element of that. Preparation, prepare as much as is needed for it, and then once you've prepared, the outcome is out of your hands, right? A sense of wonder is a big element to that, and then the final piece I wrote down was stillness and reflection. So that as you're going through the adventure, you're taking time for stillness and being able to really appreciate what is going on, but also afterwards being able to reflect on it. And so that kind of ties in, you know, as I was going through that list, I was thinking, geez, these are some like important life qualities, both for myself and what I want to impart to my kids. And like we've gone on some big adventures. We took the kids to Vietnam and Laos last year, and there were certainly lots of elements of all of those things there. A lot of unknown, like what's going to happen today. What are we going to eat? Are we going to be eating bugs? Are we going to be eating, you know, McDonald's or whatever? Um, and then there's like, you know, trying to approach life as an adventure and bringing the same qualities to it. And like we've taken over the last few years, we've been taking the kids on these whitewater canoe trips, you know, a few hours north of Toronto, and it's just such a beautiful journey going through the Canadian landscape, going down these rivers. There's few other people. There's, you know, typically more animals than people. There's elements of the unknown. There's definitely elements of risk. We went over a waterfall a couple of years ago by mistake, which could have turned out really hairy. Um, and you know, I think I hope that these experiences impart some of these lessons to kids, both in terms of how they prepare, having that sense of wonder, having that sense of I don't know what's going to happen and I'm okay with it. You know, I think being the big thing for me is like getting my kids comfortable with that idea of risk. But you know, how do you obviously you don't want your kids doing stupid stuff, right? And so how do you impart both this idea of risk, but also how do I mitigate risk? And typically you mitigate it with careful planning, right? And so you know, I'm not going to go to Cotopaxi or Aconcagua without a ton of preparation and planning. And no matter how much you prepare, there's still risk. You know, in that particular case, the weather's a big, huge unknown. And and those are, like I said, those are all qualities that I think you can bring to life that help you live a richer, more fulfilling life. And particularly the element of risk. You know, I have this model where I talk about sort of this concentric circle where in the middle you have your comfort zone. And if you stay in that comfort zone too long, you just stagnate. And beyond that is your stretch zone or your growth zone. And if I'm doing a good job of pushing people into that zone, their limits expand forever, right? And the people who like push through and made it to the summit, they have an expanded self-definition of what's possible. But if I push people too far, then I go beyond the stretch zone and I end up in the panic zone, and that's when they contract, right? And so it's managing that carefully, managing risk carefully, where you're pushing yourself, but you're not, you know, you're not jeopardizing your life or other people's lives or psychological safety or whatever that may be. So,
You know, being vulnerable here for me personally, I'll say, is that sometimes I get paralyzed with where do I go? What do I do? What's right for my kids? How do I find that perfect zone of, hey, it's not too easy, it's not too challenging. I'll get caught up with like, I have a lot of FOMO. It's like, do I take them, you know, to South America or go to Vietnam? Do I teach them to surf somewhere? Do I go hike? What do I do? And like, how do I make this super meaningful? And do I do it with one kid or both kids? And then do I involve my wife or should I do boy time only? And all of a sudden I do that and I'm like, oh man, I'm going to have to come back to that tomorrow. That's a lot to deal with. And then I don't come back to it tomorrow. And next thing you know, a week goes by, a month goes by. I've had moments and seasons in my life where I just got so paralyzed by lots of things. Maybe it's like, hey, it's a money thing that I get paralyzed by, or a time thing I get paralyzed by, or whatever it is, I get paralyzed and I don't do anything. Now, I've done things with my kids, so I want to pat myself on the back and be like, dude, we traveled Europe last summer. We did a 6-week adventure. We hiked in Switzerland. We went to Iceland. Like, I'm not trying to paint the picture that I don't ever do anything as a dad, because, you know, we do. And I still have this in me, as aggressive as I am and as much as I've done, I still have this in me. I still feel, Mike, that I'm failing a lot as a dad. I still feel like I'm dropping the ball. I'm not doing education right. I'm not doing the right. Like we had Ben Greenfield with us. I don't know if you were with us on, right? But it's like Ben's talking about, you know, his rite of passage that he did with his kids. And I'm like, that sounds cool. I'm not doing anything like that. And then Rich Christensen talked about the rite of passage that he did, and he had a summit adventure. And I'm like, I haven't summited a mountain with Tiger yet. So I have this, I'm confessing my paralyzed Vroman. And I'm wondering if that exists for you. I'm wondering how you push through that. I'm wondering what you might say to that.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that. And short answer is yeah, of course, all the time. And we live in this world where we have so much access to information and so much access to all these people, and through social media, we know what they're all doing. And so, you can hop on social like, damn, Ben Greenfield's doing another amazing trip with his kids or whatever, right? Where before you didn't have access to that. And so this world of crazy possibility, and it always feels like you're not measuring up. And I feel that the same way. For me, the tension is I keep saying I want to spend more one-on-one time with my kids, and then I don't, I don't do what, obviously that's not a hard thing to do. It just requires a bit of planning
Yeah.
in advance. It's like next week I'm going to be with this kid, and the week after I'm going to be with that kid, right? And that's, um, and then, I allow myself to feel that. And then I release the guilt and the shame about it. And then, maybe I'll just actually get around to doing it, whatever. But I also try to give myself just lots of grace, and just remind myself, I think I'm doing a pretty awesome job. And I know you're doing an awesome job. And I've met your kids and they're awesome. And so it's just like having a little bit of, we can't do everything, and we're always going to, it's part of our psychology. It's like we're always looking around, we're always seeing what everybody else is doing, and even we could be doing the most amazing job of anybody in our circle, but we still feel like we're not measuring up.
Totally.
And and I think, like, obviously it's pretty cool to be able to take my kids to Vietnam and Laos. And maybe as my kids get older, I'll bring them on some of my adventures with wayfinders, and that's awesome. But I kind of, I distill my job as parenting down to two things. One, be as present as I can with my kids when I'm with my kids, when it's intentional time with my kids. And number two, radically accept them for who they are, and communicate that to them, as frequently as possible. Just like, I accept you for who you are. And like my one boy, he's working his butt off to become a professional ball player. And like, I imagine, like, in his head that there's a lot of pressure there. And I'm trying to make sure that none of that pressure is coming from me. And I explicitly tell him, like, hey, I love that you're pursuing baseball and you're working hard. That's super cool. I'll support you however you want, but I want you to know, like, if you ever feel like it's too much and you want to quit or whatever, that's cool with me too. Like, you just do you and be who you want to be, and we can chat it through. So it's just presence and acceptance. And if I get that right, the other stuff is just details, right? And if I manage to, do a cool canoe trip or a cool trip to Asia or whatever, that's just bonus. But I got to get those first two right, and then the rest is cherry on top.
Dude, I think I'm so glad that you went there, and I'll add my perspective to this, which is, of all the dads I look at when I'm like, dude, they're doing such a great job. I love seeing people that are just engaged, present. The more present, the more engaged. And I think we know that in our hearts. And the more that we can really see our kids, because that's what we want as men, is to be seen for who we are, like to be seen for our greatness, and maybe even be seen for our darkness or our flaws, and then accepted for that. Like, hey, I see your humanity and I accept you and love you for that. And I think our little kids want that inside, our little children. And then I'll think our kids, our real kids
Yeah.
want that. And so I love that you went there. If you would, Mike, I think I don't want to say anything else to that, because I just want to, like, compliment your conclusion, and say that I align with that. To wrap this up in just a few minutes, I have two questions. One is, can you tell everybody whatever you want to tell them about Wayfinders in case they want to take an epic adventure. And for the record, they could reach out to you and talk to you about that. But also I'll put it out there that if anybody wants to reach out to us or Front Row Dads, we can connect you to Mike. So if that's easier somehow for anybody, we'll connect you to Mike. So tell us about that. And then also, if you would, tell us about your experience with Front Row Dads, because you've been an awesome part of this brotherhood. And if somebody's thinking about becoming part of this crew, what would you tell them? So tell us about Wayfinders. Tell us about your experience with Front Row Dads, and we'll wrap it there.
Awesome. That's a great way to wrap. Um, so Wayfinders, there's three main things I'm focusing on right now. One is the adventures. I run two of them a year. One's for members only, and one is open to the public. The next publicly available one isn't until October of 2025. I'm going back to Mongolia. So if you go to way-finders.com, you can find out more about that. It's a wild adventure in one of the wildest places on the planet. And take a look, and it's by application. And then we'll review. Mainly when I speak to people, it's just make sure it's a good fit for what they're looking for and that they're a good fit for the community. The other two things, I'm working on the community membership. So up until just like a year and a bit ago, I was just doing the adventures, and because people would come together and they would have these deep bonds, I wanted to create more ongoing opportunities for people to connect. And I wanted to give people an opportunity to connect with the community who didn't necessarily have the means or the time or whatever to travel halfway around the world. So we've got a lot of local events here in Toronto. We've got online events, just opportunity to connect with some really heart and soul-minded entrepreneurs. And the third is I'm about halfway through a business coaching program called the Entrepreneur's Compass, and it's just sharing my particular view on how to run a business that feels really fulfilling and doesn't overwhelm you and feels really aligned. So those are the three main things I'm focusing on these days. The second question about Front Row Dads, I think I've been a member. I kind of followed you on the sidelines for a little while, and I was concerned about bandwidth, whatever, and I joined the community about 16 months ago, and it's just been amazing. And I would, there's so much value that you provide in the community, from learning and connecting opportunities and stuff like that. The two big ones for me are, one, my band. So, this small group that I've been put in with 6 other guys. And wow, like the connections, we're now about a year into it, and the connections that we have, like these are the people I'm closest to in the world. And one of them I haven't even met yet in person. So the band, if you join Front Row Dads, just get in a band. It's so incredible. And the other is the live event you did back in December. It was just so amazing, and you just crushed it, and the people there crushed it, and everybody just showed up with this amazing spirit. And as you said, it's like a place for men to be vulnerable and share themselves and support each other and hold each other accountable. And that's a beautiful thing, right? And particularly in this, in these places of quote unquote toxic masculinity, but a lot of that is just toxic masculinity. To me, is just like unprocessed wounds, and that have been passed down through generations. And this is a place where we can open up and we can talk about that shame, that guilt, that pain, that hurt, or whatever that so many men carry. And that's the starting point towards healing that. And that's the real beauty of what you're creating with this community, is we can start healing generations and generations of trauma, and then that ripples out to the people around us, that healing.
Well said. Thanks, Mike. I was anticipating this conversation. I was looking forward to it. And now I feel thrilled. I loved our conversation. This unknown, I'm going to take away the ingredients for adventure: unknown, risk, a test, a desired but yet uncertain outcome. I wrote down, as we talked about, curiosity, flexibility and acceptance, determination and discernment, courage, preparation, a sense of wonder, stillness and reflection. All of your tested time on this earth and tested time in community, leading you to these patterns, leading you to this understanding. And then also, I want to compliment you on your ability to articulate it, your ability to tell the story. I think you unpack enough, but you're succinct, you're articulate, you have a great heart, feels like you're courageous and yet humble at the same time. So many of the qualities I admire about great men. So thank you, brother. Thank you so much. And I'm thrilled to know that things are going well for you. And October 2025, Mongolia sounds absolutely epic. And I know that there's some great adventures to be had. So appreciate today. And I hope you have a great rest of your morning, man. Thanks for making time for me.
I appreciate you, man.
All right. Much love.